For 36 years, this was where the NFL flew its biggest stars every single winter. The Pro Bowl. Sunshine, palm trees, 50,000 fans. Today, it's coming down one rusted beam at a time. And the strangest part is that it started dying the day it opened. No football, no concerts, no crowds. Hawaii's largest stadium sat locked and empty for 5 full years before a single wrecking crew ever arrived. It cost $37 million to build. By the end, the bill just to make it safe again had grown to more than 10 times that, and the state still couldn't save it. This is how the most advanced stadium in America rusted itself to death. To understand why nobody could rescue it, you have to go back to 1975, because the flaw that killed Aloha Stadium wasn't neglect, and it wasn't bad luck. It was a promise made in steel on the day they broke ground. In the early 1970s, Hawaii had a problem. Its old wooden ballpark in Honolulu was falling apart, and the University of Hawaii football team was climbing into the top tier of college sport with nowhere to play. The state needed something bigger, something modern. So it hired the Luckman firm, the same architects behind the Los Angeles arena that would host the Lakers, and handed them an almost impossible brief. Build one stadium that could host football, baseball, soccer, and concerts. On an island, in the middle of the Pacific. What they built had never been done in America. 4 gigantic sections of seating, 7,000 seats each, weighing 3.5 million pounds apiece, that could physically move. Not fold, move. Each section floated on hundreds of air bearings, porous discs fed by compressors, using flotation technology adapted from the Apollo space program. Push a button, and a wall of grandstand as heavy as a Navy destroyer would glide across the concrete, swinging the whole stadium from an oval for football into a diamond for baseball. The highest seat sat as high as a 10-story building. It opened on September 12, 1975. They called it the Metal Mecca, 50,000 seats of gleaming steel, the most flexible stadium in the country. The home team lost that first night badly, but nobody was really watching the score. They were watching the building, and they had every reason to believe it would stand for 100 years. There was just one detail buried in the engineering that nobody in that crowd knew to worry about. The detail was the steel itself. To keep costs down and skip decades of repainting, the stadium was built from weathering steel, a special alloy sold on a beautiful idea. Left out in the open, it was supposed to grow a thin outer layer of rust, a protective skin called a patina, and then stop. The rust would seal the metal and guard it forever. US Steel told the state it would never need painting. On paper, it was genius. Free maintenance for life. There was only one place on Earth where that idea fell apart. A warm, wet island wrapped in salt water. Salt air never lets weathering steel settle. It keeps the surface damp, keeps the chemistry moving, and the protective patina never seals. It just keeps eating inward. And Aloha Stadium sat right beside Pearl Harbor, breathing salt off the Pacific 24 hours a day. The rust that was supposed to protect it began devouring it instead. At first, it looked cosmetic, orange streaks on the beams. Then, inspectors started finding it in the parts that mattered. The cross braces, the cantilevers holding up the roof, the frames the moving sections rode on. By the 1990s, engineers were logging cracked welds and slipping connections. The building was quietly coming apart from the inside, and every repair only uncovered more damage underneath. Locals stopped calling it the Metal Mecca. They started calling it the Rust Palace. And here's what makes it worse. The state knew. Report after report landed on lawmakers' desks. But the stadium was still packed on game days. Nearly 50,000 people watched Hawaii finish an unbeaten season in 2007. So from the seats, everything looked perfect. Underneath, the numbers were already turning into a nightmare no repair budget could keep up with. Because for all its problems, this place was magic. For 36 years, the NFL brought the Pro Bowl here, the whole league's best players every winter in paradise. The Rolling Stones played here. U2 closed a world tour here. Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Bruno Mars, they all stood on that field. Half the island has a memory inside those stands, which is exactly what made the next part so hard to accept, because the first thing to die wasn't the stadium. It was the one feature that made it special in the first place. In January 2007, the state quietly gave up on the moving seats. The air-bearing system that made Aloha Stadium famous, those destroyer-sized grandstands gliding across the floor, had grown too corroded and too expensive to keep running. So they locked the sections in place, permanently, bolted into the football configuration, never to move again. Think about that. The single most advanced thing about the building, the reason it existed, an engineering marvel borrowed from a moon program, was switched off 13 years before the stadium itself would close. The magic died first, and once the state admitted it couldn't afford to maintain the part everyone came to see, a much darker question moved in behind it. If they couldn't keep the seats moving, how were they ever going to stop the rust? The answer was, they couldn't. Not because anyone was lazy, and not because they didn't try. They tried for years. They spent $34 million just replacing the roof over 3 seasons. They passed bills, $185 million in one refurbishment plan alone. They budgeted millions purely to scrape and treat corrosion. Every year, the legislature handed over money, and every year, the salt air took a little more than the money could fix. The villain here isn't a person, it's chemistry, and a decision made in 1975 that could never be undone. You cannot unchoose the steel a building is made of. This corrosion wasn't on the surface, it was in the bones, in 10,000 joints and beams and welds spread across a structure the size of a small town. To truly stop it, you wouldn't repair the stadium, you'd have to rebuild it. And in 2017, the state finally put a number on exactly that. A full engineering study asked one simple question: what would it actually cost to make Aloha Stadium safe and bring it up to modern code? The answer that came back is the number this whole story has been building toward, and it broke the case for saving the building completely. $300 million. That was the figure just for the critical health and safety repairs, the work needed to keep the stadium from becoming outright dangerous. And that was before code and accessibility, which piled another $121 million on top. Added up, and making this stadium safe again was going to cost well over $400 million. Now remember what the whole thing had cost to build: $37 million. The repair bill had swollen to more than 11 times the original price of the entire stadium, and that was just to fix it, not replace it. You'd spend $400 million, and at the end, you'd still be left with a 50-year-old rusting shell with the same salt air blowing through it. It was, on paper, one of the worst deals in the state's history. That was the moment the decision made itself. There was no rescue that made any sense. No amount of money could outrun the chemistry. Repairing it cost more than a brand new stadium, so a brand new stadium is what they chose. On December 17, 2020, Aloha Stadium closed its doors to fans and never reopened them. No farewell season, no final Pro Bowl, nearly 50,000 seats, and after that day, not one of them ever held a spectator again. The Rust Palace went quiet, and it would sit there, locked and rusting in the sun, for 5 more years while Hawaii tried to work out how to replace it, because that part, it turned out, was almost as hard as saving it. Replacing a stadium sounds simple. It wasn't. Hawaii didn't just want a new building, it wanted a whole district. The plan, called the new Aloha Stadium Entertainment District, would turn the 98-acre site into housing, hotels, shops, and offices, all wrapped around a new stadium, one built and run by a private developer. so the state would never again be stuck with the maintenance bill that killed the last one. There was just one problem. When the state opened the project for bids, almost nobody came. Not 2 developers, not 3. By the deadline, exactly 1 group had put in a formal offer. 1 bidder for the biggest public project in the state's history. The market had looked at the same site, the same salt air, the same 20-year timeline, and, for the most part, stayed home. With no competition to push the terms, that lone consortium, Aloha Halawa District Partners, was selected almost by default, and in the summer of 2025, the deal was finally signed. But the stadium they agreed to build is not the one Hawaii lost. The original held 50,000. The new one is planned for around 22,500, less than half, and even that number keeps shrinking. As funding got cut and inflation and tariffs drove costs up, planners openly floated dropping the opening capacity to 20,000 and adding seats later if the money ever appears. The state's share is capped at $350 million, and the surrounding district, the part that's supposed to pay for all of it, is expected to take more than 20 years to build out. Then, in December 2025, the machines finally arrived. After 5 years of the stadium standing locked and empty, the waiting was over. In February 2026, live demolition began, with crews pulling down the old awnings, then tripping the upper deck section by section, folding half a century of Hawaiian sport into scrap. The metal Mecca, the rust palace, the house the Pro Bowl built. Coming down, piece by piece, exactly as the engineers had warned it one day would. Here's the part that should make you uneasy. That weathering steel wasn't a Hawaiian mistake. It was sold as a breakthrough, and it was bolted into stadiums, bridges, and towers all over the world on the exact same promise, that a little rust would protect them forever. Aloha Stadium is simply the one that stood beside the ocean, where the promise had nowhere to hide. And the new stadium? It's smaller, it's underfunded, and its whole survival rides on a 20-year real estate bet that nobody has proven yet. Hawaii didn't really solve the problem that killed the last stadium. It handed it to someone else, and hoped. If you'd grown up going to games there, knowing all along it was rotting from the inside, would you still have wanted them to save it? Tell me in the comments. Because Aloha Stadium isn't the only great American venue that was quietly built to fall apart. There's a domed stadium near Detroit that once packed in the largest indoor crowd in history. A place that hosted a Super Bowl, and it was sold at auction for less than the price of a house before it was left to rot. That one's next.